Hi there, this is Brett Sankis, the Right Brain Business Attorney and Business Consultant, and this is another video in our series about mastering business partnerships. So today we're going to talk about divorce, business divorce, talk about breaking up with a partner, exiting a partnership. Now, no one likes to talk about breaking up partnerships, but it's easier to talk about than divorce in the marriage context, which is good because it's something you should talk about before the partnership starts. In fact, today we're going to talk about partnership prenups. We're going to talk about escape clauses. And those are clauses you put into your partner or founder agreement before the partnership begins. Now, you do have an opportunity, if things are going well, to try and bake one in now. So if you haven't done a good partner-founder agreement, one that's custom to what you expect your deal to be, not something you found online, give me a call and we can work on that now. When you can't do it, or very, very rarely, it's when things go bad. When things go bad, you're in a position where a lot of times one partner's saying right, the other saying left. The point is, it's really hard to get things done once you get in that situation where things aren't going well and the parties know a breakup is coming. You've got to do this up front. So we're going to talk about exit clauses in two different videos. So today we're going to talk about two broad categories of clauses, and then in the next video we'll talk about specific additional things that you want to think about. So they're not really exactly different ways to break up the partnership, but they're things you should have in your mind because they'll be implicated, kind of administrative procedural things that you and your partner founders should talk about up front in anticipation of one day we're probably going to go our separate ways. So two broad categories of partnership prenups that you can consider up front are unilateral and mutual. On the unilateral side, we have put and call rights. So these work well when one partner, and it can be used, I talk a lot about two partners, but obviously it can be used in the context of 3 or 4 or 5 partners. Administratively, some of these things get a little harder the more people that are involved, but don't think that it has to be just 2 people. Put and call right work really well when one partner has, say, 70, 80, 90% of the business and the other has 10, 20, 30. It's kind of disproportionate amounts of the business. So it works well because, what's happening there is one party has the right to exit and either purchase the other's interest or force a purchase of the interest. So a call right, if I have a call right on your interest in the business, it would make sense if I own 80% of the business and you own 20 and things aren't working out, that I have the right to buy your interest. It's implicitly, although we're partners, it's kind of my business, right? There's a reason I own 80% of it, or we kind of realize that I'm the one who should be left standing if things get, if there's a breakup. Now the put right is the opposite, which would give you the right to say, look, it's not working out, Brett, you've got to buy my interest. Okay, so those are the two unilateral options. And again, they work well when there's disproportionate interests. Two very important things to think about if you're going to use a unilateral put or call right approach. One is, when is it triggered? Okay, so most partners don't want the other to be able to just push them out at any point in time, like when things are going well. It really is a mechanism that most people feel should arise in a context where things aren't going well, or after a certain amount of time, someone wants to go do something different in the world. So it's pretty common that I'll do one of two things with a put call right. One is that I'll have a certain amount of time until it arises. So basically we're going to say, look, we're going to give this a good honest shot for a while. Or the idea is we're playing for a successful business, but at a certain point in time I realize we might want to go do different things in the world. So this comes up a lot in the context of a joint venture, where 2 businesses come together. And they come together for a certain period of time, but they know they each have other businesses, they're going to do other things in the world. So at some point we're going to break this up. So a lot of times it'll say after the 3rd or 4th or 5th year, one of us can buy the other out, that sort of thing. It works well in a partnership context, not just a joint venture context. Let's give this a good honest college try, and after 3 years, if we're just not working out, or we just decide we're tired of it, one of us, I could have a call right, you could have a put right. Another option though is the mutual exit clause, and what that looks like is a buy-sell agreement. Now, buy-sell agreement, you might have heard that term. It's also sometimes called a push-pull. But buy-sell, when you hear that term, it's a buy-sell agreement. It may cover other things that I'm going to talk about today, but fundamentally, the buy-sell or push-pull is about the partners splitting up the partnership. Again, it can arise in other contexts like death and divorce and disability, one of the partners buying the other's interest, but I'm talking here today about either you're deadlocked, things aren't working out, or it's just, enough's enough, or someone wants to go do something different. So, the buy-sell is mutual, right? So in the buy-sell context, both partners have an opportunity to buy the business. So this works. It works fine in an 80-20 business. If the 80 thinks, hey, that's fair, it's fine. It's all fair game. But it comes up more often in a business that's 50-50 or 49-51, or economically the parties are pretty tight. And so they both feel like they have a legitimate claim to the business. And essentially, there's a few different ways you can play this out, but essentially, whoever will pay more for the business gets it. So one of the ways you can do this is Russian roulette. Now, Russian roulette style, and this is built in obviously in legal language into the agreement, but in a Russian roulette approach, one of the parties goes to the other and says, okay, I want to break this partnership up. I'm willing to sell my interest for X or buy yours for X. So in other words, like on a per share basis, so it works out. If I own 80% and you own 20%, we need to know what I'd pay for your 20% on a per share basis. So I would say, look, I'll sell my interest at $10 a share. I'll buy your interest at $10 a share. And now you have to choose between buying or selling. So I set the price and you decide if you're going to buy or you're going to sell. That's Russian roulette. Texas Shootout. We're in Texas. I'm in Austin. So it's very fitting. This is Texas Shootout style buy-sell agreement. What that says is we will each put into a hat, right? It can be at a different mechanism, doesn't have to be a hat, but how much we will pay for this business. Or again, on a per share basis, it works better because if I own 80 and you own 20, but essentially we're trying to figure out on an apples and apples basis who will pay more. So we say who will pay more for the business as a whole, who would pay more on a per share basis, put them in a hat. Whoever has the higher bid wins. Got to go get the money and clear the table. Kind of a similar one to Texas Shootout is Mexican Shootout. And in Mexican Shootout, it's the opposite. You say not who will pay the most, what is the minimum price you would sell for. So it's the same thing. It's a blind bid, put the bids in a hat. Whoever has the higher minimum price buys the other out in a Mexican Shootout. The second thing you need to think about when you talk about unilateral options for breaking up the partnership is what is the value at which you do that. So we're going to talk in a minute about mutual options. Well, in mutual options, essentially turns out that whoever's willing to pay the most is going to take the business. That's the essence of most of those type of clauses. In a unilateral, where I have a call right and can just force you to sell to me, we need to think up front about, well, at what price? Because if we just say, at the price we negotiate, there's no way for me to enforce my right to buy your interest. You could just say, well, I don't accept that price. So you've got to spend some time up front talking about, okay, you have a right to buy me out, unilateral, I have to sell, but what's the price? Because the goal in these unilaterals is to reduce any opportunity for a disconnect, friction, argument. You're trying to make this a seamless kind of thing that can execute on its own. So there's two main ways you would think about approaching value on a buyout. One is we agree to go hire a qualified independent business appraiser. We'll share the fees. We'll agree on that person together. If we can't agree, we'll have some neutral arbiter, someone else agree. We'll go mediate it. But the idea is we'll hire an appraiser to determine fair value. Sometimes you can each hire your own appraiser, and the two of them can get together to determine fair value. I mean, there's no amount of. I mean, there's just no. These things can get very complex, and there's lots of different ways to approach them. But essentially, you're going to the market, you're hiring someone qualified to decide what the business is worth, to determine what the person who's selling's interest is worth. The others two up front decide on the metrics that determine value. You can say businesses like this sell for 4 times EBITDA, end of story, that's what it is. Now, I mean, that's easier. You don't have to spend any money on an appraiser. If you do that, I encourage you to revisit that together every year in good faith to decide if this is the right multiple. Sometimes industries get hot and cold. They come in and out of favor. So sometimes a metric you decide works today doesn't work in the future. Or it's typical that businesses might sell for 2 or 3 times EBITDA when they're $500,000 of EBITDA. But that same business, if it's doing $5 million, would sell for 4 or 5 times. In other words, multiples go up as the business grows. So it's like, it sometimes isn't perfect to use just a simple metric, but you can approach it that way, or revenue or any other metric you want to use. There's no limit to what you can do, provided you're willing to talk up front with your partners and figure out something that works. I had a client recently that came to me, and what we built in was, we called it Schoolyard Rules. And essentially it was two people coming together to build a business that had other businesses, kind of a joint venture context. And the idea is if we want to break this up, we're going to go through and we're going to decide who gets which customers, who gets which employees, who gets which assets. You know, of course, you can't force employees to work for you, but the idea, the spirit of it is, let's figure out, you go first, like we're picking for kickball in the schoolyard recess, the lot. And it's one by one. That's how we're going to chop this thing up. So there's no limit to what you can do, but it just requires you get in, you have those hard conversations up front. Again, it's much easier than a marriage prenup, a business one, because inevitably, you're going to want to go do something else in the world, and that's understandable. So dig in and have those hard conversations up front. You can also build in your agreement a requirement that once a year we'll revisit this and think about it, and is it the right mechanism? That's always a great idea. So I'm really interested in hearing, have you used these kind of provisions before? Have they worked for you? Have you run into problems? Nothing's ever perfect, so I want to hear the good and the bad. So drop a comment or send me an email. I appreciate you joining me today.